B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nitanu v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, rule of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. All right, so we'll start with a New Yorker cartoon on the topic of weasels, not on the topic of the Talmud. Now that we've fallen in love, I have a confession. I'm not a giraffe. I'm 58 weasels in a trench coat.
I'm not a giraffe. I'm 58.
Yes. And if you like that one, I put in a link to another one about that is entitled, I don't care if if she is a tape dispenser, I love her. And that is two snails talking to each other. All right, so
David, I'm sorry, it reminds me of when some of us were kids and they had the Our Gang or Little Rascals movies and or shorts, and they used to have the kids get dressed up, and you had a tall one at the bottom and the short one at the top, and they put the coat over it and walk down the street and pretend they were adults. So
yes, and for those of you who have seen The Princess Bride, there is a similar thing going on in that movie.
Okay.
All right, so the weasels of the Talmud, on one foot. The rabbis of the Talmud bring up weasels a number of times. They tend to come up as animals that can fit into small spaces and like to bite/eat lots of things. That is the through line for where the weasels come up. So I think in the interest of time and getting through our texts, well, maybe we'll start with discussion. And then we'll speed up a little bit. So our first text is from the Mishnah, from the beginning of the tractate Psachim. Norma, would you read this, please?
On the evening of the 14th of Nisan, they search the house for chametz by the light of a lamp. Every place into which chametz is not brought does not require searching. So why did they rule 2 rows of the wine cellar must be searched? This is actually a place into which chametz might be taken. Beit Shammai say 2 rows over the front of the whole cellar, but Beit Hillel say the 2 outer rows, which are the uppermost. Context. This is from the Mishnah, Mashachet, tractate Pesachim, which is about Passover. It's a very beginning of the tractate discussing how to ensure that the Torah's rule about not having chametz, leavened products, in your house during Passover, Deuteronomy 16:4. But what if a weasel brings chametz into your house?
All right, so discuss. Do you think?
Where
What do you
in
think?
a house would you define a place that you would never take chametz? I can't think of one.
didn't your mother yell at you about not taking food into the bedroom?
Yeah, right.
How many cracker crumbs were in your bed, Alan?
I'm sorry, what?
How many cracker crumbs were in your bed?
Yeah.
I wasn't talking about me.
All right.
Bathroom.
So,
No
yes.
food in the bathroom.
Excellent.
David?
Yes, Tybal.
I can look to try to find it, but what this reminds me of, I think it's the Golden Haggadah, but there's one illustration that shows a Seder table with a cat roaming underneath the table looking for rats that might have brought chametz in from the walls. And the cat then would get the rat with the chametz.
Ah,
I'll
Very
try
nice.
to grab it and make it my virtual background because
Great.
and I'm not even a cat person. I just think it's so charming. But to me, a cat is more realistic than a weasel. I mean, I'm sorry, a rat is more realistic than a weasel.
Only in
Yes.
Chicago.
Fair enough.
Both, they both yuck.
All right, so let's get on to the weasels. Diane, would you read our second text, please?
Mishnah, Sachim.
Diane, you're on mute, but if you get off mute, if you could read our second text, please. Diane, you're on mute.
I didn't even know you called on me.
Surprise.
I was reading it on my own. Okay. They need not fear that a weasel may have dragged chametz from one room to another or from one place to another. For if so, they must also fear from courtyard to courtyard and from town to town, and there would be no end to the matter. This is from Mishnah Pesachim 1:2. Context. This is the very next part of the Mishnah. In it, they play out the ramifications of worrying about weasels.
Thank you. All right, so my question for you. Do you think, if you were the rabbis, would it make a difference if this was a mouse instead of a weasel?
So now I'm going to say something because if I'm the speaker, then my virtual background will show. And here's the illustration from the Haggadah manuscript that I think is the Golden Haggadah. And see, underneath there's like there is a cat chasing a rat.
Oh, very nice.
With chametz.
Thank you for finding that.
Maybe it's a mouse, like Tom and Jerry.
Well, when I was younger, we lived way up in the country, and we lived, next to a field. And so we did get mice periodically in the house. My mother had to demouse, the house and that sort of thing. But one winter also, I remember, because we had a barn attached to our house, and I remember there was a weasel who kind of came to live in our barn. And I was very small. I mean, I'm talking like maybe 5, 6 years old. So this is going back a long ways, more than half a century. But I remember that being a friendly incident. Like, we didn't try to get rid of the weasel. And sometimes, one of my sisters would actually take peanut butter on bread out and lay it out for the weasel and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure, maybe it was a mouser in and of itself. I don't really know. I don't know what weasels do, but I would say, I would propose in answer to this question that there should be a lot more worry about mice or rats than weasels.
Okay, thank you.
David?
All right. Other
David?
thoughts about, yes.
I'm sorry. Are the rabbis really worrying about mice or weasels, or are they really trying to come up with a story that they can use to illustrate the point of you can only worry about what you can worry about, right? You can only worry about the chametz in your house. You can't worry about the chametz in your next door neighbor's house or in the next town or the next county or whatever. And it's a good story to illustrate that point.
I think I could see it going either way. It might be that someone actually brought this question up, and then everybody else is like, no, if we start worrying about this, it's going to get out of hand. Let's make the other point that you made about, you can only worry about what you can control.
But if a mouse gets in your house and takes a piece of bread,
Mm-hmm.
you can carry it from one room to another and leave crumbs around other rooms.
That's true.
Oh, gee.
Very.
David?
Yes.
I missed the Daf Yomi that day of Pesachim,
Mhm.
chapter 1, verse 2, or Luke 2. Are weasels mentioned anywhere else in Torah or Talmud?
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know. But so, what is the context of the weasel in that point? I mean,
In
we
this
know
point,
about dogs from Exodus, from Shemot. They kept their mouths shut while we were leaving, and God rewards them by letting us throw our scraps
Mhm.
at them if we could. But I don't remember reading about weasels, so I'm asking you
yeah, weasels.
what is weasel in liturgy or I'm sorry, in
Weasels.
Torah
Yeah, weasels aren't really in the Torah so much, which is why we're talking about the Talmud.
or Talmud? Yeah.
But they're in the Talmud as animals that can get into small places. And so there's a concern, potentially, that a weasel might get into your house after you have cleaned it from Passover, cleaned out the chametz, and it might bring chametz in.
In my whole life,
Okay.
I've never seen a weasel.
But that's it. Is there
Not
anything
gonna
else
worry
about it?
I mean, there are other places with the weasels, but we'll get to them.
Oh, okay, all right. Then I'll be patient.
Great. All right, and Norma, I'm very glad that you have never had to worry about a weasel bringing chametz
I
into your house.
just looked, I
too, Nora.
Googled it to see what it would look like, because I didn't even know what it would look like.
Fair enough.
Oh, very funny, Adam.
All right. So this was the first version of the weasels and Passover story. This is how the Mishnah explains it. Now we're going to get the more complicated version. And this one I will lay out for you in the interest of time. All right, so now we're in the Gemara. So this is the Mishnah was finished around the year 200 in the land of Israel. The rabbis of Babylonia talked about it for 300 more years, and their discussions became the Gemara. Mishnah plus Gemara equals Talmud. So the rabbis in Babylonia, known as the Amoraim, noticed that in the next part of the Mishnah, which I did not bring for you because it was too light on the weasels, it talks about how after you find the chametz, before you burn it the next morning, that you should put it in a hidden location so that it doesn't require checking out after again. And so the rabbis, the Amoraim, figure that the rabbis of the Mishnah, the Tanaim, are concerned that maybe a weasel will take it. And so they now are asking, well, how do you deal with the fact that one Mishnah says you don't have to worry about the weasels, and the next Mishnah seems to be concerned that maybe you do have to worry about the weasels. So in general, the rabbis of the Talmud want to make it seem as if everybody gets along. It's like the Jewish joke of the rabbi saying to one litigant, you're right, and to the other litigant, you're also right, and to his wife who asks, how can they both be right? You're right as well. So in order to make everybody right, we have to show that they're talking about two different things. So Abaya says, he's one of the rabbis, that on the 13th of Nisan, before you've cleaned for Passover, if a weasel comes in and brings bread into your house, brings chametz into your house, you don't have to be worried about it because the weasel will just leave it out lying around and it's easy to find. But on the 14th of Nisan, when the weasel comes into your house and brings bread in or takes the bread and puts it somewhere else in your house, you do have to be worried because that's when it will hide the bread and you have to go find it. That is Abaya's answer as to how these two statements can both be right. Now, Rava, who's another rabbi, asks possibly the same question that you're wondering. Can weasels tell time? How does the weasel know whether it's the 13th of Nisan or the 14th of Nisan? and it should be leaving the bread out on the 13th, but not on the 14th. And so Rava's explanation for how to make these two statements of the Mishnah agree with each other, or at least not actually disagree, is to say that if once you've searched for your chametz, then you need to hide it because a weasel might find it. But you don't have to generally worry about weasels bringing bread into houses after you search for it. Only if you actually see a weasel take bread into your house, then you need to find it. All right. Questions about this version of the weasels and Passover?
I have one.
Yes.
Don't we at some point nullify our responsibility to the chametz that may be left hanging around or that we may have overlooked? And
Yes.
the weasel could be part of the overlooking process?
Yes. We do. I will check to see if the nullification happens after you burn it the next day. If that, I'm not totally positive. If the nullification happens after you burn it, then this would say that you need to search until such time as you've nullified. If it happens after you've searched, then that might be a later rabbinic response to this worrying about weasels.
Wondering how first of all, we don't know if we have in more modern times used the word weasel, it might refer to a different kind of animal, but that's probably irrelevant. I'm wondering if it's more of an analogy or a way of, I think just what Barry was talking, that we were trying not to blame ourselves for perhaps missing some of the chametz and blaming, because a weasel is a sneaky, animal that is probably dishonest or not with our best interests in mind. So maybe this is basically using the weasel just to cover for something that we might have done mistakenly or carelessly.
It's possible. I'm sure somebody in the last 1500 years since this text was written has blamed the weasel for a piece of chametz that was overlooked.
That's right. Or any other thing that they didn't want to take responsibility for.
Yes.
I'm guessing the weasel is like that spider, that venomous spider that jumps on the back of the alligator to swim across the river. That the weasel would just say, "Hey, it's what I do. I'm not out to hurt you. I'm just I'm doing what I do."
Yeah, it's okay.
No offense.
All right. Let's go on to our most complicated version of this story about weasels and Passover. So now we switch from weasels to mice, but the weasels will come back. So what if, Rava, we met him already, he raises a question. After you've searched your house for chametz and cleaned everything out, what if you see a mouse come in with some bread in its mouth? And then you see a mouse leave with some bread in its mouth. Do you say that this mouse has the same bread, in which case you don't have to search again? Or do you think that perhaps it is a different mouse, or alternatively the same mouse with a different piece of bread? So that's question one. And then we raise another question. What if you see a white mouse come in with some bread in its mouth, and then a black mouse leaves your house with some bread in its mouth? Do you say that the black mouse took the bread from the white mouse, in which case you don't have to search your house again, because the bread came in, the bread left? Or two different mice with two different pieces of bread, in which case you have to search your house again to find the bread that the white mouse had?
Yeah.
Second
David,
question.
that's an easy one.
Yes.
The white mouse came in the house with bread in its mouth, ran through your fireplace and got covered with ashes and looked like a black mouse leaving the house.
Ah, very
David?
good. Yes.
But isn't that why, I don't know if it's halacha or minchag, but we have the custom where you do so much b'dikas chametz and then you say the formula, I did the best I could. Let the rest be nullified.
It probably came as a result of this.
Because all this stuff, because it's endless. You would drive yourself crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, good.
Yeah.
I
All
should
right.
have.
The weasel's back. So, what if? So, on the other hand, maybe mice don't take bread from each other because they're about the same size as each other. But what if you see a mouse come in with bread in its mouth, and then a weasel leaves your house with bread in its mouth? Do you say that the weasel took the bread from the mouse, in which case you don't have to search your house? Or do you think that that's only true if you can see the mouse in the mouth of the weasel, and perhaps perhaps the weasel found a different piece of bread?
Thinking that the weasel would probably also have the mouse in its mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So that would take care of both, I guess.
Right. Right. Unless you only see but if you only see the mouse, but you don't see the bread, what
Yeah.
if the mouse dropped the bread and then the weasel ate the mouse?
Yeah.
All right. Finally, what if the mouse, what if we have the weasel, if we say that the weasel took the bread from the mouse, then we assume that the mouse then we would say, okay, the weasel has left with the mouse and the bread in its mouth. We don't have to search. Or maybe the weasel has the mouse, but not the bread, and the bread is somewhere in the house and you have to search. Or the weasel ate the bread and the mouse, or the weasel ate the mouse, but not the bread. Lots of possibilities. And so after discussing it, the rabbis answer with teku. Now, in modern Hebrew, teku is a term that means it is a tie in a sports game. But in Talmudic Hebrew, it is an acronym for Tishbi Yitaretz Kushiot Ubayot, which means the Tishbi, Elijah the prophet, will resolve difficulties and problems. So basically, this means we don't know when Elijah comes to announce the coming of the Messiah, then all of these questions that we can't figure out will be solved. And until then, we're not going to worry about it, because as the Mishnah says, there's no end to these matters. Now, Joy Nelkin-Weeder, about 5 years ago, was inspired by the story to write a children's book called The Passover Mouse. And I have brought for you a YouTube video of somebody reading it, so you can see how this plays out in the story. The weasel was unfortunately replaced with the cat, but that is probably more realistic. And if you are curious more about it, then you can see an interview with the author. All right. Recognizing the time, we're going to go on to our second weasel story. So, in this story, we are now in the tractate of Ta'anit, so still in the Talmud. And in Ta'anit, it's about fasting. And this comes from a section of the tractate which is about a fast that has been declared because of a lack of rain and praying for rain. And Rabbi Ami is going to say that the faithful Jews will be sincere in their prayers, and their prayers will be answered, and there will be rain. And how do we know about the faithful Jews, the faithful people? Here's a story. So, once there was a young woman who falls into a well, and a young man hears her crying for help and he rescues her, and they fall in love and decide to get married, but there is nobody to witness their betrothal. And so as their witnesses, they have the well and a passing weasel. And then they go about their ways, planning to get married, and the young woman turns down all other suitors because she only wants to marry her betrothed, and the young man forgets about the whole thing and marries someone else.
Oy. Oy.
And they have 2 kids. And one of the kids dies tragically by falling into a well, and the other kid dies tragically by being bitten by a weasel. And in the original version, it's the young man who sees that something is wrong. In later versions of it, it's his wife who figures out that something's wrong. And she urges, and so either way, the man comes to realize that he was betrothed and these were the witnesses. In the story, in the later versions of it, the wife says, "You must divorce me," and go back and find this woman. So, and they end up finding each other and getting married and living happily ever after. So that is the story of the weasel and the well. And that is a very different weasel story from the text that we had before. All right. Our third version, our third situation with weasels. So this one is from Chulin, Tractate Chulin. Chulin is a section of the Talmud that is concerned about kosher animals and killing them so you can eat them, and certain animals that are consecrated to God. Because just like with the Pidyon Haben of the firstborn male offspring of humans being consecrated to God, but then being redeemed for 5 shekels from a Kohen, with animals, the firstborn, if it is a male, that, quote, opens the womb of its mother, is consecrated to God. And that puts it in a different category from non-consecrated animals. So Rava, our friend Rava, brings a question about a weasel. He wants to know, if a weasel manages to enter the womb of a female cow and swallows the fetus and then leaves the womb, is the fetus considered a firstborn that has, quote, opened the womb? The Gemara then answers no. The weasel opened the womb, the fetus did not, so the fetus is not considered a firstborn. And any future offspring would be a firstborn. Then, so that is probably a later generation of editing after Rava, responding to Rava and saying, clearly, like, that wasn't your question because that's blatantly obvious to those who can think in this sort of way. And so the later generations of students interpreted Rava's question as saying, what if the weasel enters the womb, swallows the fetus, brings the fetus out of the womb, and then goes back into the womb, vomits the fetus, still alive somehow, and then the fetus is born naturally? Is that considered to be a firstborn that has, quote, opened the womb of its mother? And the rabbis say, take her. We can't figure this one out. We're going to leave it up to Elijah to solve.
Seems to me if the weasel got into the womb, it must have opened the womb up in the first place, so the weasel is the firstborn.
That makes sense?
No. No, it doesn't make sense. Weasel was already living by the time he went into the womb.
That's true.
Can you take any birth live and then put it back into the womb and then consider it a new birth, the firstborn? I don't know. I don't think so.
See, you guys are like already thinking like Talmudic rabbis. Okay.
So this happened on
So
a regular basis, I'm sure, right? That's had to have this discussion, and we have a
Only
real
once.
example of what brought this question about, right?
Only once.
no, nope. This never actually happened. It was all hypothetical.
Oh, wow.
All right. So recognizing the time,
Oh, Johnny Carson.
yes. So
Johnny Carson got to do with anything.
You're about to find out.
good question. So if you want to see more about the weasels, there was a 1901 Jewish Encyclopedia article about weasels that I have brought the link for you. Johnny Carson, those of you who recognize him. So not that this is the Talmud, but it is
Funny
weasels.
man, funny man.
In 1991, he used a weasel to predict the winners of the Oscars. And the weasel got all but one winner correct. And I have brought the clip for you that you may enjoy this at your own time. In the appendices,
It's a tickle. That's a tickler.
we have a discussion about the womb raider, the third story, so you can see more of what's going on there and how it might actually have relevance to today. And then finally, I have brought every other weasel in the Talmud for you to consider the weasels. But basically, they come in as examples of animals that eat lots of things and or can get into small spaces. Lots of weasels in the Talmud. So, all right. So that is it for this evening. Stop the reading.